Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we'll delve into the extraordinary yet often overlooked life of a woman born into privilege, caught in her sister's greater glow, and shaped by a complex era of American social ambition. Her name was Caroline Lee Bouvier, though the world came to know her simply as Lee Radziwill. While the name Jacqueline Kennedy, or Jackie, is recognized around the globe, few truly appreciate the nuances and resilience of her younger sister's life. Lee Radziwill was a modern aristocrat of taste and transformation, moving from American high society to European aristocracy, all while yearning for her own spotlight in a world that kept associating her with someone else. You might think you know the Kennedy family saga, or at least some version of it, but be prepared to discover lesser-known details. This is a story of close sisterhood, personal reinvention, heartbreak, and immeasurable grace, lived quietly, yet undeniably. From fashionable childhood escapades to glamorous jet-set friendships and unexpected tragedies, Lee Radziwill's life is like a tapestry stitched with threads of ambition, loyalty, rivalry, heartbreak, and adaptation. By its end, you may look upon her name in a whole new light. Let us begin by stepping back into a very particular era of American history, one steeped in social dynamics that could shape a young woman's aspirations. Lee Radziwill was born in 1933 into a well-connected family where everything from daily dress to table manners carried symbolic weight. This world of high society had its own codes, debutante balls, exclusive gatherings, and an almost Victorian emphasis on social rank, marriage, and suitable occupations. But by the time Lee was coming of age, the world was quickly evolving. The Roaring Twenties had given way to the Great Depression, which in turn was replaced by wartime mobilization in the early 1940s. New York City was a hive of cultural movements, from glamorous Broadway openings to the intellectual circles swirling around Morningside Heights and Greenwich Village. Even behind the formidable walls of polite society, major shifts in women's roles were starting to bud. Young women from well-to-do families were finishing their formal educations and more frequently exploring new horizons: journalism, the arts, philanthropy, and even politics. While tradition still held them in a refined context, the post-war world was too dynamic to ignore. Into this transitional atmosphere stepped Lee Bouvier, overshadowed from the start by her older sister Jacqueline, destined to become an iconic figure in American history. Yet these two sisters were not so different in some respects. Both were trained in the art of poise from a young age. Both were cunning in their ability to captivate a room, and both recognized the value of style as a silent language. But if Jackie projected a quiet, regal presence from the time she was a child, Lee's energy was more restless, a mixture of determination and a longing for approval that she never quite received. Their father, John Verneau Bouvier III, known as Black Jack Bouvier, was a charming yet troubled socialite whose personal ups and downs had substantial effects on the girls. Their mother, Janet, came from a privileged background, a strong-willed woman who insisted on impeccable manners and clear social standing. This environment was both an incubator for success and a pressure cooker of expectations. Even as children, Jackie and Lee were aware that the name Bouvier signaled more than just a family identity. It announced a certain inheritance of style and refinement that demanded living up to. From the earliest memories, Lee would walk that tightrope between admiration for her beloved sister and anxiety over being the other Bouvier daughter. As the Second World War ended and the 1950s dawned, Lee found herself a teenager just as America was surging into a new age of economic prosperity, suburban expansion, and cultural shifts. Yet the world of the Bouvier was still one of stately brownstones in Manhattan, horse riding in the Hamptons, and dancing lessons at the best schools. For a while, it felt as though this structured, glittering world was her entire universe. But the 1950s introduced television, evolving celebrity culture, and a rejuvenated sense of possibility that captured the imaginations of young people everywhere. Despite being groomed to follow a conventional socialite path, Lee found herself lured by the artistry of stage, screen, and literature. She was what might now be called an early adopter of new cultural trends, devouring the works of emerging writers, jazz musicians, and avant-garde painters. While her sister Jackie tended to keep her creative passions within a polite framework, Lee dreamed of forging a more rebellious, or at least more adventurous identity. This longing for self-definition took on a new form when Jackie married John F. Kennedy in 1953. Suddenly, Jackie was hurled into the national spotlight, and by the early 1960s, she would be one of the most photographed and admired women in the world as First Lady. Lee, who had always experienced a quiet sense of competition, was now definitively in the shadow. Jackie was not just a celebrated social figure. She was political royalty, practically American nobility. Yet for all the differences that would arise, the sisters shared an unbreakable bond. Even in adulthood, they wrote letters to each other regularly, confiding their fears, joys, and frustrations. Jackie's ascendance to the White House introduced Lee to a new circle of influences: political advisors, cultural icons, heads of state. She thrived in these new environments, savoring every opportunity to expand her worldview. Behind her refined smile, however, she wrestled with the question, who am I, beyond Jackie's sister? Lee's first marriage was to Michael Temple Canfield in 1953. He was a publishing executive and purported adoptive son of a British royal figure. Though speculation around his parentage danced through high society gossip, that marriage, filled with early illusions of romance and partnership, would end in divorce only a few years later. The couple did not have children together. The dissolution of that relationship was a defining moment in Lee's early adulthood. She was forced to confront not just the heartbreak, but her own insecurities about forging a life path that felt right for her. This period overlapped with Jackie's own honeymoon phase with JFK, which included living in the political circles of Washington, making appearances at exclusive events, and carefully fostering a public image that was simultaneously historic and glamorous. For Lee, it was a time of searching, of figuring out how she could cultivate her own sense of identity in a world that was more than willing to dismiss her as just the First Lady's sister. That quest would lead her into a second marriage, one that seemed plucked from a European fairy tale. In 1959, Lee married Prince Stanisław Stas Albrecht Radziwill, a member of a noble Polish family with historical ties to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The marriage itself had its complications. Both bride and groom had previously been married to others. For Lee, it was a chance to wear an actual princely title, to be a princess in her own right, and to establish her own social circles in Europe, away from the White House mania that was about to engulf Jackie. Lee threw herself into that role. She adopted her new husband's culture, learning about his aristocratic lineage, mastering European etiquette from the vantage point of someone who could realistically host or attend any sort of grand event. The pair's wedding even raised some eyebrows in the Catholic Church, as Lee had been divorced and was now marrying a divorcee. But in the swirl of social events and personal ambitions, such details did not slow her down. She was enthralled by the romance of a new life overseas, where hopefully she could flourish in her own domain. The timing, however, was bittersweet. Just a year after her second marriage, John F. Kennedy became President of the United States, and Jackie stepped fully into the role of First Lady in January of 1961. The media were infatuated with Jackie's fashion sense, her effortless sophistication, and her gently breathy public manner. With fresh grace, she reinvented the style of the White House, bringing in a new generation of artists, musicians, and intellectuals. At official events, cameras would capture the well-known silhouettes of JFK and Jackie. Sometimes, just off to the side, Lee would appear, petite, fashionable, always impeccably dressed. Yet few headlines spared much detail for the younger sister, unless it was to comment on some ephemeral socialite tidbit or to emphasize the closeness of the Bouvier siblings. Still, whenever Lee returned to the States or when Jackie visited Europe, the two would share private conversations, sisterly giggles, and occasional tensions. While Jackie was known to the world as an icon of American style, Lee earned her own admirers among the European aristocracy. She was seen as vivacious, witty, and possessing a keen eye for design. However, behind the glittering events and the swirl of cocktails at embassy receptions, Lee was gradually discovering how illusory certain aspects of her married life could be. Prince Radziwill was charming, wealthy, and brimming with continental sophistication, yet not all was harmonious. Like many aristocratic marriages of that era, there were pressures to maintain decorum, to produce heirs, and to host lavish gatherings. Their union had a glamour that dazzled onlookers, but behind the scenes, disagreements about finances, fidelity, and personal ambitions took a toll. Lee craved a sense of purpose that extended beyond the typical aristocratic wife's role. She nurtured a love for interior design, for the arts, and for forging cultural connections between continents. Yet it was challenging to carve out time and respect for her own projects, while also fulfilling the myriad social obligations that came with her marital title. Soon enough, cracks formed in the relationship, and though they held on for years, even having 2 children, Prince Anthony Stanislaw Albert Radziwill and Princess Anna Christina Radziwill, contentment was elusive. During her marriage to Prince Radziwill, Lee also stumbled into one of the more unusual episodes of her life, a brief attempt at an acting career. While living in London in the mid-1960s, she developed a fascination with stage performance and began to cultivate friendships in theater and film circles. Some speculate that she was encouraged by high-profile acquaintances, individuals who recognized her glamour and believed she might shine in an artistic field that was separate from Jackie's territory. After all, being a First Lady's sister wasn't exactly a role that could be prolonged. It was more of a social happenstance. Lee's initial foray into acting involved stage appearances and even some ambitious consideration of film roles. One notable attempt was her involvement in a theatrical production of The Philadelphia Story. This turned out to be fraught with difficulties. Critics were merciless in their reviews, highlighting her lack of formal training and the overshadowing effect of her star-studded last name. An unvarnished truth set in. The audience was curious about seeing Jackie's sister on stage, not about Lee Radziwill's acting talents. She tried to push through, longing for that intangible sense of accomplishment that comes when an individual stands solely on their own merit. Ultimately, the unfavorable reactions made her think twice. She withdrew from the limelight, realizing that a public acting career might not be the stable, fulfilling path she had hoped for. Still, this brief stint in acting would bring Lee into contact with influential cultural figures, none more significant than Truman Capote. Capote was one of the most famous writers of his generation, known for his flamboyant personality, his sparkling wit, and his somewhat dangerous penchant for gossip. Lee and Capote struck up a friendship that quickly became something more akin to an artistic collaboration, though it was never formal. They were both enthralled by style, personal expression, and the intricacies of high society. Capote was enthralled by the secrets that Lee could share from within political and aristocratic circles. In turn, Lee was drawn to Capote's flamboyant creativity and the validation he offered, someone of Capote's literary stature showing genuine interest in her as an individual, not merely as an appendage to Jackie. Their camaraderie led to lavish dinners, late-night conversations, and even the occasional rumor of a future writing project. Tragically, though, this bond would later sour when Capote published certain works that lightly fictionalized real-life figures in his social orbit, exposing private details for the sake of sensational storytelling. In time, Lee distanced herself from Capote, feeling betrayed that he would exploit the confidences she had once shared. This episode left her with a lingering caution about whom she could trust. In the world of high society, it seemed, nothing was fully sacred, and everyone was fair game for a good story. Beyond the realm of theater and literary parties, Lee was gradually gravitating towards interior design and style curation, which became a true passion for her. She had an innate flair for combining colors, textures, and furnishings in a way that felt both sophisticated and personal. As her marriage to Prince Radziwill began to grow stale, she found fresh purpose in establishing her own design consultancy. No matter how ephemeral her aristocratic marriage might feel, she could pour her energies into shaping interiors that expressed her eclectic sensibility, French antiques mingling with modern art, plush textiles harmonizing with minimal lines. This preoccupation gave her a sense of self-worth that had been elusive. She was no longer Jackie's sister or a princess by marriage, but a savvy, creative consultant with a growing list of clients who admired her taste. This period also saw Lee forging friendships with fashion designers, photographers, and magazine editors who recognized her potential as a brand ambassador of style. Of course, even as Lee found new purpose, major historical events were unfolding around her, and none so tragic as the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in November of 1963. For Lee, this event was both a personal and public tragedy. The shock of losing her brother-in-law, combined with the knowledge that her beloved sister's life would be irrevocably changed, was devastating. The entire world mourned JFK, and Jackie became an icon of loss, captured in countless newsreels draped in a black veil. Lee stood by her sister's side, providing what comfort she could, all the while dealing with her own sorrow. The wave of global grief was overwhelming, and amid this tidal surge of heartbreak, Lee took a subdued position, quietly supporting her sister and nephews. In the years following, Jackie would remarry Aristotle Onassis, shifting the family narrative once again. Meanwhile, Lee carried on, seeking stability in her personal life, which grew increasingly complex. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Lee's marriage to Stas Radziwill was on the rocks. Rumors began swirling that she was lonely and restless, while her husband's attention was elsewhere. The ephemeral veneer of high aristocratic life did not bring the warmth she yearned for. Their divorce became final in 1974, but not before another storm of speculation that the couple had parted ways long before the official papers. It was a painful rupture, overshadowed again in the eyes of the media by Jackie's dramatic remarriage to Onassis, and subsequent tragedy when Onassis died in 1975. Jackie's enormous public persona continued to capture the world's gaze, while Lee coped with her private heartbreak. She was a mother now, raising two children who inherited not only the Radziwill name, but also the complexities that come with any famous lineage. The heartbreak of a second divorce had taught her that love and legacy can both be transient. Around this time, Lee started a curious friendship with the photographer and adventurer Peter Beard, who was known for his striking wildlife photography in Africa and his bohemian approach to life. Their relationship was never publicly clarified as purely platonic or romantic, but what is known is that Beard's spontaneity and free spirit appealed to Lee's yearning for exploration outside the rigid constraints of her background. She accompanied him on safari trips to Africa, immersing herself in the raw beauty of Kenyan landscapes. Photographs from that era show Lee in rugged safari attire, far from the polished salons of Paris or London, smiling with an authenticity that suggests she felt liberated in that environment. She would recount stories of being awakened at dawn by the sounds of wild animals, or sharing an open-air meal with local guides. This period hints at a side of her that might have been nurtured under different circumstances, an adventurous streak that flourished outside the closed circles of high society. The experiences in Africa left a deep impression, shaping her evolving sensibilities in art and design. She began collecting African sculptures, textiles, and paintings, subtly weaving them into her interior projects back in Europe and the United States. Yet, just as she seemed to be defining a life on her own terms, Lee encountered another wave of emotional turmoil with the death of her nephew, John F. Kennedy Jr., and his wife Carolyn in 1999. It was a gut-wrenching event that reopened wounds from JFK's assassination. The Kennedy curse, as it's been called, weighed heavily on the extended family. Lee, who had always maintained an affectionate relationship with her niece and nephew, mourned privately, aware that the eyes of the press would once again be drawn to the family tragedy. To make matters worse, her own son Anthony Radziwill, married to a future television personality, was battling cancer around the same time. Anthony died just weeks after John F. Kennedy Jr.'s fatal plane crash, deepening the heartbreak to unimaginable levels. It was a harrowing period, a convergence of tragedies that underscored how no amount of wealth or privilege can shield one from fate's cruelties. For Lee, these experiences, strung together across decades, created a tapestry of resilience. She seldom let the public see the depths of her grief, but close friends recalled her remarkable ability to pivot toward what beauty remained in the world. Over time, she also grew to value privacy far more intensely. She retreated from public life in many respects, focusing on personal relationships and her ongoing appreciation for art, literature, and the excitement of cultural discovery. In the final decades of her life, she dabbled in public relations and style consulting. She also married for a third time in 1988 to the film director Herbert Ross. That marriage, too, ended in divorce in 2001, though they remained in each other's orbits until his death. Each marital chapter seemed to underscore a pattern. Lee was a romantic soul, invested in the belief that love could offer both adventure and security. But the reality of those unions rarely measured up to her expectations. One of the lesser discussed aspects of Lee's identity was her quiet philanthropy, particularly after the tragedies that struck her family in the 1990s. She devoted energy and resources to cancer research foundations. She also supported initiatives in the arts, using her connections to help emerging artists find platforms. Friends in the art world would sometimes speak of how Lee could be surprisingly down-to-earth in personal interactions, with a sharp sense of humor and a deep curiosity about their inspirations. She believed that artistry was one of the few pure expressions of humanity, unconfined by the rules of social hierarchy. By the time she neared her later years, that once restless drive for recognition had softened into a gracious acceptance of life's changes. She had forged a reputation as a style icon in her own right, minimal yet bold, an editor of her surroundings, skilled at curating a sense of atmosphere. While Jackie's global legacy became almost mythic, Lee's legacy crystallized among those who admired elegance, innovation, and a certain intangible sophistication, qualities she possessed without the conventional fanfare. Nonetheless, Lee's story was not without controversies. Perhaps the most infamous rumor that plagued her was the suggestion that she had been romantically involved with the Aristotle Onassis before Jackie. Certain tabloids and society gossips speculated that Onassis initially courted Lee, only to eventually shift his attentions to her older sister, leading to Jackie's marriage with him in 1968. While numerous insiders have insisted that Lee's interactions with Onassis were platonic or incidental, the rumor persisted. Some even claimed that the sisters' relationship had been irreparably strained over it. Publicly, Lee never confirmed these accusations. Privately, her circle insisted the rumors were exaggerated. Yet it serves as one more example of how Lee's identity was repeatedly undermined by external chatter linking her to Jackie's life choices. Another contentious aspect of her life arises in examining her short-lived attempts to break into acting. Critics have been divided over whether she was serious about pursuing artistry or whether she simply chased the novelty of show business as a form of self-validation. Some argue that it reveals Lee's persistent search for a spotlight that would grant her an identity distinct from her sisters. Others are more sympathetic, suggesting that she genuinely harbored creative aspirations and was simply thwarted by a cruelly public environment that refused to let her flourish independently. Regardless, this debate underscores the difficulty she had in navigating her own path within the cultural climate of the 1960s and 1970s. Debates also arise when considering Lee's role in shaping the Camelot-era narrative of the Kennedy White House. Some historians say that Lee was actually an informal advisor to Jackie, contributing ideas for the White House restoration project and helping Jackie refine the cultural image of the administration. Others contend that she was peripheral, overshadowed by powerful political figures, and overshadowed by her sister's strong personal vision. In truth, it's likely that Lee played a behind-the-scenes supportive role, offering aesthetic insights. She also became an unofficial ambassador of sorts, mingling effortlessly with prominent figures in Europe, bridging cultural divides in ways that were beneficial to the Kennedy administration's broader image. As for her historical significance, Lee's story helps fill in the hidden corners of the Camelot legend and the broader Bouvier-Kennedy narrative. While she was never a key political figure, her intimate vantage point allowed her to see the private human realities behind the facade of power and status. She humanizes the Kennedy story, reminding us that Camelot was not just a political fairy tale, but a family with complex relationships, internal tensions, shared grief, and individual members who each yearned for personal fulfillment. That aspect of the story is often overlooked when we reduce the Kennedys to iconic images or bullet points in history textbooks. Lee, with her layered experiences, stands as a reminder that no dynasty, no matter how storied, lacks quiet heartbreaks and personal yearnings. Moreover, Lee's life continues to serve as a point of reflection for those intrigued by the intersections of fashion, high society, and cultural evolution. She exemplifies a certain style that was never static, one that adapted across decades, from structured 1950s couture to the bold prints of the 1970s, ultimately settling into a timeless minimalism in her later years. She became a go-to reference for interior designers who admire her refined yet risk-taking approach to decorating. Her circle of friends often saw her as the embodiment of a specific brand of American aristocratic taste, well-traveled, curious, polished, and not overly fussy. This, too, adds to her legacy, as many in the design and fashion world cite her as an underappreciated muse. In her final years, Lee Radziwill became something of an elder stateswoman of high society. Though she would have disliked such a formal title, she was frequently spotted at exclusive art openings or quiet dinner parties, still impeccably dressed, still able to command a room's attention with her graceful presence. She passed away in 2019, leaving behind a mosaic of impressions for those who knew her or followed her story. She was not a figure who changed global politics or pioneered revolutionary social movements, but her life, complex, glamorous, and occasionally tragic, encompassed the kind of quiet courage that often slips through the cracks of mainstream history. She has been called a style icon, a princess, a sister to an American legend, an accidental muse, and even a cautionary tale about the emotional toll of living in someone else's shadow. Each of these labels contains a kernel of truth, yet to reduce Lee Radziwill to any single definition would be to miss the delicate, poignant layers of her identity. So as we close the book on this remarkable individual, let's pause to take in the significance of her story. She was, in many ways, an emblem of how ordinary emotional struggles can persist within extraordinary circumstances. She reminds us that every famous family is composed of real human beings, each with desires, insecurities, heartbreaks, and redemptions. She was neither purely victim nor triumphant heroine. She was a woman who navigated the luminous labyrinth of 20th century aristocracy and celebrity, continually adjusting her sails. Whenever life's storms threatened to capsize her hopes, she regrouped, found a new direction, and carried on with an unmistakable grace. Above all, she reminds us of the profound and often delicate bonds of sisterhood, which can be both a source of comfort and a deep well of unspoken tension. Thank you for watching this video of Lee Radziwill's life. Despite all the glitz and intrigue surrounding her family name, her story offers an intimate look at what it truly means to be human. Longing for love, grappling with loss, adapting to new identities, and ultimately finding moments of beauty and purpose wherever possible. May her resilience and understated wisdom resonate with you, as it has with so many who witnessed her quiet grace over the decades. And may we remember that behind every iconic public figure, there is always a supporting cast of equally compelling stories, waiting to be acknowledged for their own merits. Lee Radziwill's life was certainly one of them, a story of glamour, heartbreak, reinvention, and above all, the enduring power of personal elegance.